Hey friends, thanks so much for tuning in. You know how much we appreciate it. It is great to have you back, and it's great to be back after taking a few days off last week, a much needed respite. Hung out with a couple of my sons and took them on a special little trip, and I'm just so thrilled to be back because real news is the heart of what we do here at SGTreport. We are the antithesis to CNN and the Mockingbird mainstream media. And, you know, we cut our teeth in the precious metal space talking about the suppression of physical silver and physical gold on the COMEX. And to that end, I wanted to invite back on my good friend James Anderson. He's over at SDbullion. I love those guys. They're a premier sponsor of SGTreport. Check out the banner at the top of SGTreport. James joins me right now to talk about all things precious metals and the economy. And James, welcome.
Thanks, Sean. I appreciate it. It's good to be on.
Yeah, it's good to have you back, man. We've known each other a very long time, haven't we? I mean, I've interviewed you years and years ago when you weren't even with SDbullion, and now you're with the guys that I love and the guys that I trust to buy my physical silver and gold.
Correct. Yeah, it's been about 8 years now, I think, since we started talking.
Isn't it funny, man? 8 years of this hideous suppression of the precious metals. And it's a story that now is so long in the tooth, it's almost quaint. People are sick of hearing about it, but it's a fact. It's a hardcore fact. And even as the suppression continues, JP Morgan, one of the suppressors, has stockpiled one of the largest physical silver positions in history. It's really an amazing story.
Yeah, it is. But just to reiterate, I mean, we were talking back when silver was gapping up, right? I mean, so we were talking about it before when it was $25 to $30 to $40 to $50, right? And then, of course, the discussion after when it went 50 all the way down to where we are these days, going kind of sideways. So, you know, the long history of JP Morgan's involvement in the silver market kind of goes back to the Bear Stearns collapse. And if anybody really wants to learn this, probably the best guy who studied the sector for decades, his name's Ted Butler. So if you want to research JP Morgan and how they inherited Bear Stearns after their collapse and likely inherited their silver short position on the COMEX, just look that up. Ted Butler's written about it. It's all public record online, so you can find that information. But as far as the number that JP Morgan's got now, they just passed 140 million ounces on the COMEX warehouse. Their COMEX warehouse has 140 million ounces of silver, and that's physical silver that the COMEX uses as a fractional reserve for deliveries when people stand for delivery, which is not very often. It's probably a fraction, maybe 0.5%, maybe less of the trades that happen on COMEX actually get settled in physical. But as it stands today, they're about 53. They're over 53% of all the physical silver that backs the entire COMEX. And the COMEX is truly the leader in the price discovery mechanism for silver. So when you go on a website like ours at SDbullion.com and you look at the prices of various silver products, it all traces back to the COMEX, really, as far as the price discovery mechanism. So JP Morgan is deep in the trenches of that process, and as well as other commercial banks. It's not simply JP Morgan. And that record number that we discussed, 140 million ounces, is a huge sum of 140 million ounces, a huge sum of silver. And they started acquiring it. They had no silver in April of 2011 after the price started going down, which many allege that they were really involved in instigating. They all of a sudden very quickly got themselves a COMEX warehouse and have since gone from 0 ounces of silver to 140 million ounces of silver on COMEX. And no one knows, for instance, whether or not it's for their own account or whose accounts it's owned by, et cetera. But what else is known and is public record is that SLV, they are the custodian for SLV, which is the largest ETF for silver. So a lot of times institutions want to have some exposure to silver, but they can't buy physical because of certain rules and stipulations they have. So they have to buy an ETF. And so SLV is one of the largest, it is the largest ETF in the entire silver investing community. And there's a lot of silver in that trust. And so JP Morgan's essentially the custodian and an authorized participant, which means that they can actually exchange some of their equity shares for physical. So Lord knows how much silver over the years that they've siphoned out of SLV as well. So we're talking in hundreds of millions of ounces. And for perspective on historical precedent, that the Hunt brothers at most had about 100 million ounces of physical silver in 1980. And Buffett and Charlie Munger and Berkshire Hathaway, they may have gotten about 120 million ounces in late 90s. So, JP Morgan right now has the largest silver position in physical silver that's ever been acquired by one entity. And so it's definitely breathtaking, Sean.
Well, it's strange, too, because, the carrying costs of holding and storing all of that silver in physical form has got to be, fairly expensive. I mean, to secure it, to warehouse it, is quite high. Is all of that silver located at the COMEX? Or where do you think all that silver lives?
A lot of the silver is in London. They have, I believe that's where most of JP Morgan silver is held, is in London. And then there's other warehouses on the COMEX, but none of them have even close to the amount. Like, for instance, if you look at a chart of COMEX warehouse holdings, JP Morgan's essentially going up on like a line just straight across diagonally through the chart, and everyone else is kind of waxing and waning, and they're all small. They're all pittance compared to the size. So, and most of their dealings are in London, essentially. That's where most of their physical silver is held. And that's also, by the way, where a lot of SLV's silver is held. So, 140 million ounces is what's transparent. And, there's other, Ted Butler, like I mentioned before, I mean, he surmises that they have up to 600-700 million ounces. And he comes to his numbers by various ways. But, it would be safe to bet that they probably have at least half that. I mean, I would venture to guess that they've taken a lot out of SLV over the same time frame.
Well, it makes you wonder, what do they know, that the common man doesn't know? Because they've beaten us all up so badly, that even the hardest core bulls in the silver and gold space have probably slowed their purchasing over time, just because, there's only so much punishment you can take before you get a little bit sick of the whole thing. But I do know, and I still know, and I will always know, that I've got my physical silver and gold that I've bought over time. I'm not selling it. I've never sold a single ounce, and it is real money. So let's just talk about the manipulation. How did these guys execute this? Because you're right. When you and I first started talking, it seemed very clear that silver was going to go through 50, and once it broke 50, there was no stopping it. They capped it, and I remember that Sunday night. They brought it down, what was it, $6? On a Sunday night. I forget the date. It was, I think, in 2011. They dropped it $6 like the hammer. And from that point on, it was down, 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 back to where we are now. Explain to people how that works with the COMEX. Isn't a COMEX silver contract 5,000 ounces? And these guys are able to, what? They'll sell thousands of contracts short.
That's correct. So it represents 5,000 ounces. And most of the time it's simply traded and settled in U.S. dollars. But JP Morgan essentially was always on the short side. So if anyone wants to go long on silver, a lot of speculators for over the past 5-6 years have been going long, net long in silver, and JP Morgan was always on the other side buying the downside. They would be on the short side of the bet. And they basically have deeper pockets than the speculators, and so they just wait it out. And eventually, the speculators run out of bets they're making long, and they'll eventually win the price discovery. And price discovery has been down for the last 6 or 7 years, so they've been acquiring their silver at very, very cheap prices. I would imagine if you dollar cost average it over these years, they're probably down in the low 20s now by how much silver they've been getting lately. I think this year alone, since the beginning of 2018, they've acquired 25 million ounces in just 3 months. So if they keep that up, they'll be over 200 million ounces by the end of the year on COMEX alone. So it's just a breathtaking pace. And the question is why? Why the hell are they doing that? And my hunch is it's kind of twofold. You have first off, when according to the Financial Stability Board, which is basically the Bank for International Settlements little pet group that basically stipulates what the largest banks in the world should be doing. When they talk about the globally systematically important banks or financial institutions, JP Morgan is the tallest and highest one at the trough, and they're the ones that are most risky to the stability of the financial system, right? So JP Morgan is in a situation where they're too big to fail, essentially. So if they were ever to have a really bad situation with derivative bets they've made, it's possible they could get bailed in. But again, I would expect that they would probably have the winning side of the derivatives. So if there is a problem with banks, my fingers crossed, maybe they'll lose and they'll go away. But my hunch is they won't. It's a combination of probably greed, because they believe silver and gold in the long run are probably going to go up in value in the 2020s and the years to come. And it's also a question of fear and just making sure that they have some value. They have a park of real of real monetary assets. And if you think about it, gold, they really couldn't go out and get a big positioning physical gold bullion because that's mostly spoken for right now by China. So for them to go out and acquire gold in mass like they are doing in silver would be a lot more difficult. So it makes sense that they would take a beta play, take silver in the physical form, because it would probably end up outperforming gold. As gold's price inevitably goes up, silver will probably outperform it in the years to come.
Well, and the thing that's obvious to those of us who understand, the geology of mining the stuff out of the ground, it's obvious that silver is a suppressed commodity, a financial asset, because of the silver to gold ratio, which historically has been, 15 to 1, 12 to 1. I guess they're mining it out of the ground now at like closer to 9 to 1. But what's the silver to gold ratio we see today? Isn't it closer to 80 to 1? You can buy 80 some ounces of silver for every 1 ounce of gold. I mean, that's absurd.
Correct. Yeah. And if you look at a chart in the last 50 years, even typically it gets to about 80 and then diverts back down. So, how much longer it stays at these expanded levels, it's hard to say. Right now, gold's been stronger than silver, especially over the last year or two. But technically speaking, if you get silver beyond 1850, you could gap up to 25 really, really quick. So I'm not saying that's happening tomorrow, but if you keep an eye on silver, once it gets over 1850, you'll see some aggressive prices gapping up higher, I imagine.
Yeah, and all I was going to say is that it just strikes me as as we talk about the historical silver to gold ratio norms throughout human history. If you look at that chart over human history, there was no COMEX. There was no paper, silver, and gold. So hello, the elephant in the room is these bogus COMEX contracts, right? Look what's happened to Bitcoin ever since they launched a Bitcoin COMEX contract. And yes, that's all cash settled, but I do find the chart a little bit of a head scratcher. Bitcoin could only go up because there was real market price discovery between people who bought and sold Bitcoin to each other. And then you get these damn banks involved with their paper contracts. And ever since that thing launched, I think it was around December 16th, it's been off a cliff, straight down, 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 down for Bitcoin. So, I think people who are rational need to ask what the hell's going on here. And I think we know. The criminal banks are criminal, period.
Well, we've already discovered through the WikiLeaks cables from the Treasury founding, that the COMEX, its founding was essentially founded on controlling the price discovery mechanism, essentially. It was a meeting in London with the biggest heads in the bullion banks, and they discussed how if there was a large futures exchange, it would outsize any physical buying, and therefore the price would be volatile, and it would discourage U.S. citizens from buying gold in mass. And that was the big concern, because gold wasn't legal for private citizens to own until the beginning of 1975, and by that time it was already $200 an ounce. So before then, you couldn't own more than 5 ounces, because FDR had essentially confiscated it in 33, and then 34, the private gold hoarding clause was put in, and you couldn't have more than 5 ounces. And then, the COMEX was essentially guaranteed the hegemony of the dollar in the country, and that people wouldn't rush to gold. And so the COMEX's very founding is all about, how to keep the price discovery mechanism in place and make the system stable. It's totally about, national security. If you think that the empire wouldn't want to control prices, you don't know your history. It's just, that's pretty simple.
Yeah. No, that's 100% right. You're right. This was all about maintaining the hegemony of the U.S. dollar and the petrodollar after Nixon took us off the gold standard. But that whole story is also long in the tooth. And we see that 1988 cover of the Economist magazine, the Rothschild Economist magazine, predicting a world currency this year in 2018. Now, I don't know that things are going their way anymore because of the deep state counter coup, which I believe is actually real, with President Trump being in the White House instead of the Wicked Witch, who was a Rothschild agent. Maybe they're not going to get their way this year, but we know what their end game is. Their end game is to dethrone all sovereign currencies, all national currencies, and ultimately give us something from the BIS or the IMF or the World Bank, a world currency as predicted by that 1988 Economist cover. So, here's my question. Even though so many people, even silver and gold bulls, have been lulled to sleep by this suppression, the common man has been brainwashed into thinking that silver and gold are barbarous relics. They're not real money. They will never be real money again. But meanwhile, world leaders who aren't brainwashed, you mentioned China, I'll mention Putin, the Russian ruble is now the most officially gold-backed currency in the world. That's a big story because these world leaders do value precious metals, gold specifically.
Mhm.
in physical form.
Yeah, it's Russia's their gold hoard is no joke. They just had an official photography session in their central bank, and it got posted all over the internet in the last month or two of their gold hoard, and it's magnificently large. It's the photos that they put out on the internet, and it's not just gold; they have silver as well and palladium too. For anyone who hasn't seen those photos, just Google it; you'll find it all over. And it's 1,800 tons, I believe. And if you crunch down the numbers on their M0, their cash, the amount of rubles that are out in their currency system versus their official gold backing, it only takes a price of about $2,400 an ounce in U.S. dollars for the ruble to be fully backed with their M0 for their official gold. So that's like 5 times beyond any other big country in the G8. And the only outlier in that chart that I sent you was, China's is I think it said their M0 required $21,000 price, of gold in U.S. dollars for their M0 to be backed. But, China officially has, I don't know, like 1,700, maybe 1,800 tons of gold. But the truth is, if you've been watching physical gold flows since the 80s to today, I mean, they probably have at least 20,000 tons of gold that they could officially declare when they feel like it's time. And so you could just simply divide that. And so you essentially have gold, at $2,200, they would back their M0. What they do with their M1 and M2, Lord knows. It's probably going to be pretty ugly there when they have to deal with how much bad debt they have. But, China's autocratic. They basically can pull off a lot of stuff so long as they can keep people under wraps, and they rule by force. So I don't expect them to have an insurrection or a revolt, even if they devalue their currency by many-fold. I would expect them to continue on and eventually probably be the largest economy in the entire world, maybe a decade or two from now. I mean, you already have Christine Lagarde on record talking about having the IMF headquarters in Beijing by 2025 or so. I mean, she literally said that, like in an interview or two I saw maybe a year ago. That's what she was talking about in a dream scenario, that the IMF headquarters will not be in the U.S., but it'll be in Beijing.
Well, so, look, and I just want to say something about Christine Lagarde and Merkel and Hillary Clinton. These are all New World Order witches. I mean, literally Rothschild puppets. And, the list is long. It's not just these females. I mean, on the right side, on the male side of the board, we have people like George Soros, John McCain, Lindsey Graham. Well, look, the list of Rothschild puppets on this planet, I think, is much longer than we'd like as it pertains to politicians. So, when these people say the IMF headquarters will be in Beijing by 2025, you have to take that seriously. They're telling you what the plan is, which is probably not a good thing for the dollar. Now, I'm on usdebtclock.org right now, and I just want to talk to you about these ratios because I've been following this story for so long, and of course I have a lot of physical silver and some physical gold. And according to usdebtclock.org, the dollar to silver ratio right now is $604 per ounce. Now, it wasn't that long ago, maybe a year ago or two, I'd look at this U.S. debt clock and it would say the dollar to silver ratio is 1,000. So I don't know why it's only 604 according to these guys right now, but they are saying that the paper to physical silver ratio is 178 to 1. They're also saying the paper to gold ratio is 75 to 1. I actually think it's much higher than that, more paper. I've heard recently that it was 200 ounces of paper gold to every 1 ounce of physical over at the LBMA. What do you think is the truth? What do you think silver should be priced at today in dollars? It seems to me it should be a lot more than 600 because we were talking about that 3, 4, 5 years ago, and the U.S. debt is much higher now.
Yeah, it's difficult to say because it's just, it's gotten beat down so far, so badly. Is not even being a monetary asset is what essentially most common people don't even think of silver anymore as being a monetary asset, whereas gold is, especially because about a fifth of it's owned by banks and governments alone. I mean, they literally hoard this stuff. So the silver aspect is extremely valuable, and it's much more valuable than $17 an ounce, and that's why I own a decent amount of it. And I'm sure that's why you own it. My expectation is for it to blow past 50 in the 2020s and probably cruise toward triple digits. And that's my hunch, and that's where as far as it going to 600, I don't know, because Lord knows what the currency is going to be buying you at that time. I'm not sure, but I did think it's in the best interest not just the United States, but other countries as well, to just continue to devalue their currency for all the promises they've made. I mean, the U.S. government is according to Dr. Kolikoff, is net present value in debt for $210 trillion as far as promises that have been made and that have to be delivered in the coming decades that are coming. So in order to deliver those promises, you're going to have to devalue the currency. And it's not going to be because all of a sudden the economy picks up, you can pay for that. You're going to have all these great tax receipts and stuff. No, it's going to be a devaluation of the currency that's going to be able to handle that. Or you just flat out default, which I don't expect will be the case. I would imagine they just go the standard way they always do, which is just devalue the currency some way, somehow.
Print. Yeah. Well, it's John Williams who was calling for hyperinflation to rear its ugly head in 2016, 2017. So somehow they've been able to keep this thing at bay. I think they've been able to keep it at bay because of what's happening with the stock market.
Right.
Billions upon billions pouring directly into these stocks. And it's kind of interesting to see this headline today. Trump escalates war with Jeff Bezos. Quote, Amazon costs taxpayers many billions of dollars, end quote. I think that's spot on. Now, if you think about what the New World Order powers would want to do to really execute a healthy economy, they would fund and back a company like Amazon. Now, keep in mind that Jeff Bezos has that enormous contract with the CIA for their cloud services, right? So he is sort of a CIA. Well, and he bought Washington Post. And what is that? It's a Mockingbird mainstream New World Order rag, right, that just espouses these globalist talking points. So what would the elite want to do? They'd want to back a company like Amazon that puts everybody else out of business because they don't even have to report earnings. Meanwhile, they are rewarded with this, incredible market cap in the stock price. So I think Trump is right, because just like Amazon, in many cases, barely pays its labor force a living wage, same with Walmart, a lot of these people who work full-time then also qualify for food stamps or housing assistance or whatever, and these corporations get a free ride. So I do love what Trump is saying right here, because I think Amazon is really a beast at this point.
When you look at the tax subsidies that they get, this is not what Main Street people get, right? I mean, so they're using accounting and all types of law bending and rule rigging for their favor to take advantage of just the average Main Street store down the street, right? So, I mean, when you look at Main Street, it's been pretty much decimated by corporate America, and that's been happening for decades now. And of course, a lot of these industries went off to China, and of course, Trump appears to be making the effort to try and bring some of the Main Street's businesses back. And whether or not he's successful at that or not, I'm not sure. But it is interesting in the last year to two how we've seen huge blowback on social media as far as the way that they've been tracking everybody's data and politicizing stuff. And trying to ruin channels like yours where people can't even get notified when you have new videos and take off some of your subscribers, et cetera. So that's just going to blow back eventually. I mean, average people don't want to be told what they can say and what they can't. We have the First Amendment, and that's the most important. That's one of the most important amendments we have, is the ability to communicate. If we lose that, we are screwed. So anybody who gets in the way should be put down. And so places like Facebook, you're talking about YouTube, Twitter, and then these gigantic corporations like Amazon. I mean, it's good to see them get a little bit pushback, because they've gotten away for so long in the last 6 years with all this currency creation and these stock buybacks and everyone running to the stock market. And, obviously their prices have gone up, and that's fine. I have no problem with capitalism, but some of this looks a lot like cronyism to me. And so I totally agree in your sentiment, Sean.
Yeah, well, let me ask you this, too. I mean, as it relates to the Mockingbird mainstream media, CIA Mockingbird media, have you seen that new video in which dozens of local affiliates around the country are parroting this idea that fake news is being propagated on social media by people that aren't doing fact-checking, but you can trust us, but they're all reading the exact same script?
The sharing of biased and
false news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these stories simply aren't true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And the is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This 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 is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
Obviously sent to them on the newswire, obviously written probably by Reuters, owned by Rothschild. I mean, people are waking up because this stuff is so painfully obvious right now. These people, these local Mockingbird media representatives, you know, and if you live in a big city, some of these people are making $500,000, $2 million a year to read the news, the quote-unquote news, to read the news. It's absolutely transparent now. It's obvious how criminal and corrupt this system is.
Yeah, I mean, just the fact that there's actually no, like in some of these smaller towns, there's no budget. Like those people that, like in some of the larger towns, you're right. Some of those people do make good money, but in the smaller towns, I mean, take a good look at those people. They look broke. I mean, look at the clothes they're wearing. They don't look like they're making six figures. Most of these people are barely getting by, and they have to be pretty cynical. I mean, can you imagine you claim yourself as like a media or a person or someone who's a journalist, and you come to work and all you do is be told, read this teleprompter? I mean, that would be soul crushing.
You know what? You actually hit the nail on the head here. And I want to give you a little personal insight here because I got my degree in journalism. I won't say what year it was, but honestly, to go to the local affiliate, the small local affiliate, and to work there in their news department literally would have been about $7 or $8 an hour. I mean, literally back then, less than $20,000 a year. You're absolutely right. In these small markets, these people, by the way, when you come out of one of these indoctrinated liberal schools, if you don't understand, if you can't speak the language we speak, and they don't teach this stuff in the schools, in the colleges, even if you get a degree in economics, they don't teach you about the Federal Reserve being privately owned. They don't teach you about the history of the Rothschilds and the banksters and any of this stuff. So these people get out and they're indoctrinated, and really all they care about is trying to get to the next market. So they're going to read whatever comes off the newswire with as much earnestness as possible because they don't know any better. I don't think that they're all necessarily malevolent. I think most of them are purely ignorant.
Right. I think that's totally true. I think they're just essentially yes men trying to move up and, you know, get higher in the next city that they can move to and get big in the bigger markets if they can. So it's it is what it is. Journalism's gotten gutted, just like our currency's gotten debased, just like a lot of the things that we buy at the local store. They're cheap now. They're not good quality. I mean, just look around. They all the things are pretty similar. Like when you start debasing a currency, everything else kind of follows. You know, so this is not surprising. What is surprising is the fact that that literally, you know, the same script is sent to all these major markets and people read it. And, you know, it's just fun to see the internet make fun of it and show you that, yeah, you do kind of live in the matrix. And so you should be aware of that and not take everything you hear as being absolute 100% truth. You should do a little bit of your own thinking.
Well, absolutely. And when you see a video like that, it is a jaw dropper, right? Because they are all reading the exact same script. And one thing I want to say, too, is about these people who get to the very top and the people that are making $6, $8, $10, $12, $14 million a year, the Anderson Coopers, the Megyn Kellys. These people are bought and paid for. These people, I think, largely do know what's going on, and they're more than happy to take their marching orders, either because they've sold their souls or because they're very comfortable with the money they make. And I'll give you a great example of that. Megyn Kelly's interview with Comet Ping Pong owner James Alefantis, an absolute jaw-dropper. No journalism going on there whatsoever. It was merely pandering to give him a platform to make him look like a victim.
James, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
What a terrible ordeal this must have been for you.
It has been.
And it was absolutely pathetic. But that's what these people do. They don't do real journalism. They don't talk about the crimes of Hillary Clinton and the Clinton Foundation, as does Charles Ortel, as do we here at SGTreport. They paint over it with a wide brush, just trying to please their puppet masters, trying to please their puppet masters like George Soros. And honestly, when I say Rothschild, I know that sounds a little tired, but who was their candidate? Their chosen one was Hillary. Who did they hold multi-$100,000 per plate fundraisers for? Hillary. This is fact. This is on the record, folks.
Yeah, real journalism, it makes you an enemy of power. I mean, that's the truth of it. If you're going to do real journalism, people in powerful places aren't going to like you. And so that's what's missing a lot in our world today is just the people who are willing to speak the truth and do real investigations. We do have a little bit of that, though, thanks to channels like yours and other people on the internet who are doing the work. But then it gets mixed up with a lot of people who are who are doing poor work, and then there's also then there's just a big culture clash about fake news, etc. So it's best for people to do a lot of their own research and critically think about where they get their information, and to do a lot of it on their own. It's not that difficult now with the internet to get pretty deep in the weeds if you have interest in a subject.
Okay, James. Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I just want to say this too, guys. SDbullion, I don't know how many people know this. I actually had a friend who didn't know this, and it surprised me. SDbullion is the Silver Doctors, guys. That's silverdoctors.com. Great site. We post a lot of their stuff. They started SD, that's Silver Doctors, Bullion, SDbullion.com. Been a premier sponsor and good friends to SGTreport now for a very long time. I appreciate you guys. And here's the thing, guys. When you buy physical silver and you have it delivered in your own hands, when that mail package comes and you open it, I swear to you, it is just one of the most fun, glorious things, because you've exchanged your fiat, which over time only loses value, for something physical, tangible, and for thousands of years has been considered real money. It's a very cool thing to do. Click the banner at the top of SGTreport to visit SDbullion. And James, tell us more about the site. And you guys have a special offer for folks too, a free publication for folks too, don't you?
Yeah, we do. I wrote this PDF guide that you can get for free at SDbullion.com/book. It's slightly long. It's about 200 pages, but it has all the information I think you're going to need for making intelligent decisions when you're buying physical gold and silver. And it goes through a litany of reasons as to why it makes sense today, especially at these prices, to be buying gold and silver. But it also goes to the ways of doing it intelligently. How to do due diligence on any dealer, not just us, but anyone else that you may buy from or sell to in the future. Most people coming into this market don't know what they're doing, and you have to be careful because there's a lot of people in this industry and a lot of businesses in this industry who take advantage of people who don't know what they're doing. And so you have to be very careful. You have to stay away from the bait and switchers or the people who use greed to get you in the wrong places. So we made this guide for people so they can learn and have tools that they need in the years to come to buy and sell safely. So it's called it's SDbullion.com/book, and it's called The 21st Century Gold Rush.
Okay, and I want to just say one last thing before we part ways here. When you talk about people being taken advantage of, guys, this is not a scary proposition for anybody to whom this information is new. Just go poke around on SDbullion, go to silver, look at silver coins would be, where I would start personally. You can also look at silver rounds. I think what James is talking about is people who are newbies might come in, get involved with the wrong company, and be sold expensive numismatic coins. That's really a field for experts. But if you go to SDbullion and you just want to get tangible silver, you can get the stuff in some cases for as low as 40, 50 cents over spot if you're getting physical silver rounds. And if you want to get a physical American silver eagle minted by the U.S. Mint, you can get those for, what are those right now, $2.99 over spot, James?
Oh, they're even lower. Like, premiums right now, Sean, are the lowest they've ever been since I've been in this industry. I mean, that's how low demand is right now. We have premiums for silver eagles as low as $2 over spot for some of the backdated ones, because you have some weak hands selling back to the market. And just so you know, silver eagles, the U.S. Mint sells them brand new to dealers at $2 over spot. No one can get them for less than $2 over spot. So anytime you see a silver eagle being sold for just $2 over spot, that's a good deal, because you can typically sell them back to dealers at $1 over spot, or you can sell them to other investors for $2 over spot, or you have a trusted counterparty that you're willing to do business with.
James, if people want to contact you guys, do you want to shout out a phone number and the website again?
Yeah, sure. It's SDbullion.com. I'll give you the number, 1-800-294-8732. And, our staff can answer any questions you have. And again, that free book is SDbullion.com/book.
James, thanks so much, buddy.
Yeah, Sean, it's a pleasure, man.
A pleasure. All right, guys, and thank you so much for tuning in. I can't tell you how much we appreciate it. Appreciate all of you. We're in this mess together, and if we all stand together, the winds of tyranny will be defeated. Just like this gun grab orchestrated with these goofy teenagers coming out of Parkland, that's all Soros-backed. It's just so obvious, just like that Mockingbird mainstream ridiculous commercial about fake news. It's so obvious. That's why we're here. Alternative media is growing. Mockingbird Media is shrinking. Thanks so much for visiting us at SGTreport.com, thelibertymill.com, and thephaser.com. Have a wonderful week, guys. God bless.
5-10 years ago, man, we were on an island. Now there's hope all over the place. I mean, really, this thing is coming down.